Heading deep into the mountains of Uttarakhand for a story that kicks off as a deeply unsettling supernatural mystery, but then it twists into a horrifying true crime revelation. It's an absolutely fascinating look at how human greed and cultural folklore can collide in just the most devastating ways.
Right, so what actually happens when the ultimate protector of a family becomes its darkest curse? That terrifying question sits right at the center of our deep dive today. We're looking at a case that brilliantly illustrates how deeply held regional beliefs can blend with, frankly, the absolute darkest corners of human psychology. We're going to break down exactly how a family's devotion was weaponized and how a community used the supernatural to process an unspeakable reality. All right, let's jump right into part one, the village of Pari and a deeply devout family. Now, to really grasp the sheer shock of this tragedy, we first need to talk about the concept of the Kuldevta. In Pari Gardwal, these family deities are everything. I mean, they're the ultimate protectors. Gagan's mother and his pregnant wife Madhu were incredibly devout. They trekked to the temple every single morning to pray to their Kuldevta, literally no matter what the weather was doing. And because of this unwavering devotion, the villagers fully believed this family was under, a divine shield. That's exactly why the tragedy that followed felt so completely unnatural to everyone in the community.
But before we get to the actual incident, we've got to look at the family dynamic behind closed doors. The crucial point here is the massive friction over inheritance. Notice the stark contrast here. When their father passed away, the elder brother, Sushil, inherited the bulk of the farmland. Meanwhile, Gagan, the younger brother who served in the army, only received this tiny little handout from Sushil. To Gagan, this felt like he was basically begging. And this quietly, almost invisibly, planted some really deep, venomous seeds of resentment in Gagan's mind regarding his family and his perceived lack of power.
Moving on to part two, a mountain accident where the illusion completely shatters.
Picture this. It's a pouring rainy morning. Madhu and her mother-in-law head to the temple, just like always. Now, the unpaved mountain paths in Pari turn into absolute slippery mud pits during heavy rain. Gagan claims he's away working out in the fields. But when the women don't return home, the village forms a search party, and they make this horrific discovery right at the bottom of a steep hill, the bodies of his mother and his wife, who, remember, was carrying their unborn child. The scene looks like a straightforward, albeit heartbreaking slip-and-fall accident. The village is mourning, and Gagan, well, he's playing the part of the perfectly devastated widower.
But hang on a second. There was this one deeply unsettling anomaly on Madhu's body. A bleeding wound right on her chest. Now, the villagers actually hastily dismiss this. Out in the mountainous region of Pari, jackals and wild animals are pretty common, so the locals just assumed, an animal had gotten to the body before the search party found it. But keep this specific detail in the back of your mind, because I promise you, it changes everything.
Which brings us to part 3, Curse of the Masan, and a really dark aftermath.
So, Gagan quits the army, ostensibly to stay home and raise his 2 young daughters. They're 11 and 10 at the time. But look at how rapidly things just deteriorate. A really dark, oppressive energy totally overtakes the 11-year-old. Week 1, she complains of this crushing heaviness. By week 2, it's worse. She's physically swelling up and becoming super aggressive. Week 3, she's whispering to herself, staring completely blankly at walls and hitting her head against the doorframe. And then, in week 4, and guys, this is where the story shifts directly into supernatural horror territory. Gagan discovers a mark on her right chest. It is the exact same mark her mother had when she died. Understandably panicking, Gagan drags his daughter over to the village priest. And in a truly chilling moment, the priest starts to pray, looks deep into this little girl's eyes, utters just one single word, and literally flees the room in absolute terror. Okay, so to understand why a seasoned priest would just run away like that, we have to look at what that word means. A Masan isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill ghost. In Garhwali folklore, this is an incredibly dangerous entity. It doesn't just casually haunt a house, it forcefully attaches to a living person with a specific intent. That is absolutely critical to understand. A Masan attaches to the living because it has a terrifying, unfinished reason for refusing to cross over. The spirit inside this little girl, it had a message.
Now, here's where things take a massive turn. In part 4, The Dark Truth. We're crossing right from the supernatural over into true crime.
You see, the entire narrative flips on its head when Gagan's younger daughter, the 10-year-old, secretly pulls the priest aside after the crowds disperse. She tells him everything she actually saw and heard, and just like that, everything changes. It forces us to completely re-examine the tragedy. This wasn't some tragic mountain accident, it was a calculated, cold-blooded crime. And obviously, it forces us to ask the million-dollar question, why? Why would a husband do this? While looking at the two faces of Gagan reveals a seriously horrifying duality, the whole facade of the dutiful, grieving army man crumbles to dust when we uncover his true motives. Gagan was harboring this extreme, festering greed over the land he felt he was cheated out of. But even worse than that, he harbored a toxic, deeply misogynistic hatred for his own daughters. He was violently desperate for a son so he could carry on his so-called army legacy. When he found out his pregnant wife was likely having another girl, his rage just completely boiled over.
So the priest comes back and performs this horrifying exorcism on the 11-year-old. And during this ritual, the spirit of Madhu, literally speaking through her own daughter, reveals the exact clinical breakdown of how the brutal murders were executed. Gagan intercepted them on that muddy path. He violently confronted his wife about the baby. When his own mother expressed shock at how monstrously he was acting, he literally shoved her down the cliff. Then he pulled a knife, stabbed his wife right in the chest, creating that strange wound everyone blamed on wild animals, and finally threw her body down the hill to stage the accident.
And that leads us to our final chapter, Part 5, Justice and Aftermath, the final resolution.
As the possessed daughter reveals all these gruesome details right in front of the horrified villagers, absolute chaos erupts. Gagan realizes the jig is up, he's been caught, and he makes a totally desperate bid to escape. He sprints away, but, and you really can't make this up, it's a moment of absolute poetic justice, the fleeing murderer slips in the mud and falls off the exact same cliff where he killed his family. He actually survives the fall, but there is no escaping his crimes now.
The villagers drag a battered, muddy Gagan straight to the police. Now, sure, the cops can't technically arrest a man based on a ghost story, right? But the physical evidence they uncover, combined with the younger daughter's eyewitness testimony, is more than enough to lock him away for good. And here's the silver lining. The elder brother, Sushil, steps right up, he proves Gagan is unfit and secures full legal custody of both his nieces. So thankfully, the surviving daughters get a safe ending, totally free from the horrific toxicity of their father, and that 11-year-old makes a full recovery.
We're going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Whether you personally believe in the supernatural, or if you view all of this purely through a psychological lens, the core of this story is profound. Sometimes the supernatural, the terrifying folklore of the Masan, is literally the only way an isolated community or a deeply traumatized child can actually process and expose the very real horrors of greed and domestic violence. What do you think? Thank you so much.